The Golden Stone Saga 2 by Jenny Dooley. An Express Publications graded reader at level 4.
Επιμέλεια Γιώργος Πιτροπογιαννάκης.
Chapter 1. Draig's Awakening. 5 years had passed since William first heard the story. Ever since that night in his grandfather's cabin, his favourite television heroes no longer seemed as interesting as before. They now belonged only to his childhood. As Grandfather Howard had given him the old book to keep, William had read the story of Goldstone many times, and every time he read the final page, he wished he could find out what happened next. He wondered whether the new king had stayed in the wilderness forever, whether he had ever met the old wizard again, and whether peace would prevail in the land of Delenia. But what aroused his curiosity most of all was whether the loathsome King Draig was truly dead. William examined the book's leather binding, then looked at the inside cover.
There's nothing said about the author, and it doesn't mention a publisher. If the story did continue, how could I even find the second book? I know, I'll write it myself.
He picked up a piece of paper and a pencil and stared at his bedroom wall, lost in thought.
But where do I start? With Goldstone? With Kylan? Or someone completely different?
With thoughts of dark mystery swimming around his excited mind, he began writing the new story's sinister prologue. Vyra was ancient, but who would have known? Her pale peach soft skin looked a mere 20 years old, and her piercing grey eyes were as clear as the brightest day. High cheekbones and full black lips gave her beautiful face a cruel expression, and she moved like a panther in her tight, sparkling burgundy-coloured bodysuit. It was 10 years since she had last seen Draig, and many, many more since she had given him the medallion. Its magic had prevented him from growing old, ensuring a reign of eternal evil. However, the unthinkable had happened. The medallion had been destroyed, and Draig along with it. Vyra had been wandering the world, seeking new kinds of magic to add to her talents. When she heard the news of Draig's death, she started the long walk back to the dark fortress. She now stood in its courtyard, casting her eyes around the moonlit ground.
No wind ever blows through this place. And when that new king left for the wilderness, he ordered the fortress sealed. So you're still here, Draig. Every last piece of you.
She picked up Draig's dust-filled clothes from the centre of the courtyard, licked the tip of her finger, and wiped it around the inside of the left sleeve. Then, having removed her finger from the sleeve, she smeared a few specks of the dead king's dust on a strange black crystal. The clothes were now spread out on the ground, with the crystal sitting within the collar. Vyra began muttering a complicated magic spell, and the crystal started throbbing. From every corner of the courtyard, particular particles of dust were drawn towards the crystal, like iron filings to a magnet, joining that which lay within the clothes. When this was complete, and Draig's clothes were full of his dust, Vyra shattered the crystal with a bolt of lightning, scattering fragments that mixed with the dust. The clothes glowed, as dust turned to flesh, Draig's awakening had well and truly begun. Chapter 2. The Gavarus Slaughter. The village of Gavarus lay dying, having been recently attacked by an unknown army. Many had died during the fight, but many more died afterwards. Crops had mysteriously withered, and livestock had been dying inexplicably. There was little food to go round. Famine was the prime concern for the remaining villagers. No one had really thought much about the reason for the decay. Merak placed his arm around his younger sister's shoulders. It had been another day of tears and confusion.
Why, Merak? Why did Mother and Father have to die in that battle? Why did they have to die so soon? And in such pain?
I don't know, Lissa. Why should any of us be harmed? This village is a threat to no one, and we have nothing worth taking.
You're wrong about that.
The unfamiliar voice caught Merak and Lissa by surprise. They looked up to see a robed figure, an elderly man with a white beard. He wore a band of shining gold around his bald head and held a twisted wooden staff in his right hand.
What do you know of our trouble, stranger?
I know that a great many of your people have died, and I know that unless you act quickly, this whole village will soon be no more.
Whatever do you mean?
It would be best if I showed you.
With that, the man led Merak and Lissa to the statue at the center of the village.
What can you tell me about that statue?
It is a statue of Dazan.
Dazan is your god?
Of course. He's everyone's god. Do you not worship Dazan?
The stranger smiled.
He and I have an understanding, but I wouldn't exactly call it worship. Unfortunately, your enemy, Draig, worships only himself.
Draig? But he was destroyed. Our parents said so.
Oh, he's very much alive, and he's now the proud owner of the crystal from that statue's forehead.
Why should we be worried about a crystal?
The stranger shook his head and exclaimed,
You children have obviously not been reading your history. That crystal controls the very life force of this village. It protects and nourishes the land, and now that it's been taken, the slow death has begun.
So that's why the plants and animals died.
Exactly.
There was a long silence before Merak finally asked the stranger for his name. The man smiled, then answered,
I'm generally known as Kylan.
Kylan? The wizard?
Merak's voice was a stunned whisper.
But we thought you were a myth.
As I said, you've not been reading your history.
Will you help us retrieve the crystal?
To an extent. You see, there's only so much that I'm allowed to do.
But there's not much that we're able to do. None of us know how to fight.
Well, it just so happens that I know where we can find a man who can.
Who is he?
Another of your myths. He is your king, Will Goldstone.
Chapter 3. In Search of Goldstone.
Please, Merak, I want to come with you.
Merak held his sister's pretty face between his hands and shook his head.
No, Lissa. You're only 15.
You're only 17.
There'll be much danger.
But what if something happens to you? I'll be the only one of our family left.
At least there'd be one.
Lissa thought about this for a while, then cried out,
then I'd rather it ended now, out there, with the last of our line struggling to make a difference. It's all or nothing, Merak. It's a family matter.
There was a long silence before Merak turned to Kylan and asked for his advice.
Merak, I can't say whether Lissa should come or not. You must decide between yourselves. As Lissa said, it's a family matter.
Oh, all right, Lissa. I can see I'd never change your mind. Besides, even if I persuaded you to say you'd stay, you'd only follow us, wouldn't you?
It had crossed my mind.
So that's that sorted then.
Kylan had already started to walk off towards the forest.
Pick up your things and follow.
Can we have a moment to say goodbye to our friends?
Kylan stopped walking and turned to face the youngsters.
Wouldn't you rather be saying hello?
Merak and Lissa nodded.
Then hurry. With each wasted moment, the future moves into Draig's hands.
Draig stood alone in his throne room. He had always been a figure of sheer evil. But as his reign of terror had been ended, and as a mere mortal had succeeded in killing him, he was now more twisted than ever before. During his last moments of life, his face had become more horrible than could be imagined. Vaira's magic was powerful enough to bring him back from the dead, but only in the form he had at the very end. Such was his ugliness, he had destroyed the remaining mirrors in the dark fortress, and he now wore a mask. But he was alive, and once more able to create appalling misery. He whispered to himself as he thought about the destruction he was now causing, and that which was to come.
I once ruled this world. I shall again.
He was so lost in his dreams of cruelty, he did not notice Vaira as she entered the throne room.
Am I disturbing you, Draig?
What is it, Vaira?
I have some good news for you. General Tychon has returned.
Then Tychon too appeared.
Ah, General. You have a gift for me?
I have indeed, Your Majesty.
The warrior advanced upon his grim master, holding out a crystal in his blood-stained hand. Draig sat on his throne, threw back his head, and cackled.
One more village, Vaira. Then I'll have it all.
I don't wish to shine on your darkness, Draig, but there is that little matter of the lost crystal of Dazan.
What of it?
It's still lost.
So, what is the importance of one crystal, when I shall soon wield the power of 13?
Legend says that without all 14 there will be no power.
So find it!
I continue to search amidst the mystic flames. When our god Scareth reveals its resting place, I shall inform you.
Having left the village, Merak, Lissa, and Kylan passed through the surrounding forest in order to collect some food for their journey. Then, after filling their pockets with nuts and berries, they went further and found themselves in a barren, rocky wilderness. Merak and Lissa were stunned, as they had never been out of their village before.
I've never seen land like this before, Kylan. Why does nothing grow here?
As I said, the crystal protects and nourishes your village, as well as the surrounding area. Outside the magic circle, there's nothing but dust and stone. It's the same the world over. Each village has a statue of Dazan. Each statue bears a crystal. Each community prospers.
Unlike his sister, Merak found the unusual landscape quite appealing.
It has a strange beauty. Not that I'd want to live here.
Who would?
You'd be surprised. Strange land breeds strange creatures. Let's hope we don't meet any, eh?
Hours passed. Feet grew tired, and day turned to night. Kylan led his young companions down into a small valley. The trio approached a small hut that had been built in the mouth of a cave. Orange firelight flickered from within the hut, and although it didn't appear to be a place that could offer much comfort, there could be no doubt that it was home to someone. What surprised Merak and Lissa was that it was surrounded by bushes and trees, and that instead of the harshness of rock, what lay beneath their feet was a comforting carpet of lush green grass.
How can this be? This place lies outside any village's magic circle.
Indeed it does.
So how can the land flourish without a statue of Dazan?
Oh, there is a statue.
The travellers turned to see the owner of the voice, a tall, muscular man with shoulder-length fair hair, wearing a golden headband, which was just like Kylan's. He held an axe in one hand and a sack of firewood in the other.
The statue is very small, but it's enough to bring life to this tiny area.
Just then, the man noticed Kylan. His face was a picture of joy and amazement. He threw down what he had been carrying, and the two men embraced.
I don't believe it. Kylan, it's been so many years, I thought I'd never see you again.
Well, I admit I've been late in dropping by, King Goldstone. And I'm afraid I must tell you that this isn't a social call.
We need your help, Your Majesty. Our village lies ruined, and you're the only one who can save us.
There was a long, uneasy silence before Goldstone sighed.
I'm sorry, but you've come to the wrong man.
Merak and Lissa were speechless. Chapter 4. Will Goldstone's Return. The statue was about a foot tall and carved out of wood. In the center of its forehead was a tiny fragment of one of the magic crystals. Kylan thought as he examined the sparkling sliver,
I wonder which one he took that from.
The other three were sitting around the fire in the middle of the hut. Merak and Lissa had been telling Goldstone all about their troubles, but he seemed unimpressed.
I truly am sorry about your parents, but people die all the time.
Yes, but not like this, not anymore.
Does it not worry you that our newfound harmony might suddenly end, Will Goldstone?
Goldstone nodded.
If that were the case. But I don't see it. You said yourself, Merak, that the army that attacked you was little more than a band of criminals. And a way to sort out such people can always be found. Anyway, I plan to live out my life in peace.
I'm afraid there's little chance of that. The men were indeed a bunch of ragged brutes. Ragged brutes led by General Tychon, Draig's loyal servant.
So, he's still alive, is he?
Unfortunately.
Well, he's probably working for himself now. It proves nothing about Draig's return from the grave.
Draig lives, Will.
I killed him myself. I reduced him to dust.
Frustrated and disheartened, Lissa began to sob with anger.
Our parents lie butchered.
As do mine. As does my one true love.
After a brief silence, Kylan decided to spell things out again.
Tychon's rampage has taken him through nearly every village in Delenia. He has but one purpose, to steal the crystals of Dazan. Now you know as well as I will what could happen if those stones fell into the wrong hands.
They needn't be Draig's hands.
And right now, the crystals reside in the Dark Fortress.
The place is in ruins.
But inhabited, active. Flashes of magic light up the sky above, a sign of the evil to come.
Draig was no sorcerer.
You're forgetting the witch, Vyra. She who gave him eternal life in the first place. She's back, Goldstone, and thanks to her, so is Draig.
Kylan sighed as he raised his stick in the air.
You never needed so much convincing in the past. A plea for help was all it took. But I intend to convince you, and I shall convince you.
Kylan closed his eyes, placed a finger on his headband, and began murmuring quietly. A golden ray leapt from the stick and struck the hut's ceiling, creating a shimmering pool of rippling light. Shapes started to form. Then the shapes became pictures.
Are you showing me Draig, Kylan?
I cannot. The Dark Fortress is surrounded by a magic shield which cannot be penetrated from so far away.
So, what is this?
Look hard, Will Goldstone.
Goldstone could now see images of innocent people being slaughtered by the dozen. The voice of Kylan suddenly echoed,
This is what will happen 3 days from now when Tychon reaches the remaining village.
Goldstone watched the massacre for several minutes. When Kylan opened his eyes, the images disappeared and the screaming stopped.
Whether or not Draig lives doesn't matter, Goldstone. Think about what I've just shown you. Could you honestly stand by and let that happen?
Goldstone suddenly had much to think about. The images had struck hard, bringing back memories that he thought long buried, and creating a new sense of horror and outrage. Finally, his eyes filled with tears. He spoke in a low, dry whisper.
No, of course not.
Then pick up your weapons and join us. There's still plenty of history to be written.
The foursome headed off into the night, Goldstone holding his magic sword and shield for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Kylan was squeezing something in the palm of his closed hand. It was the crystal fragment which he had secretly taken from Goldstone's statue.
Where are we going exactly?
Kylan quickly put the tiny crystal in his pocket.
To find horses. Tychon will reach the village in 3 days. Unless we can travel faster, he'll get there before we do, as we have farther to go.
Merak looked confused.
But the nearest village is ours, and there are no horses there.
There is actually another village quite close by. It lies to the north.
Goldstone's face lit up as he remembered the nearby village.
That's right. It's called Amphathan.
And that is where we are going.
Chapter 5. Gynog the Dwarf. It was dawn by the time the travellers reached Amphathan. The place was deserted.
The villagers must have fled during Tychon's raid. You see the hoof prints? They made off on horseback.
Well, some horses were left behind. Look!
The dying ground was littered with bones.
The horses have been eaten for food. Once the people had gone, disgusting trolls moved in.
Where are they now?
Back in the wilderness where they live.
We hope.
The sound of a horse snorting caught Merak's attention.
There are still horses here. Living horses.
He made his way over to the barn from where the sound came. He was about to open the barn door when Lissa grabbed him by the arm.
Horses mean troll food. Those creatures could still be here.
Merak noticed a sword lying on the ground. He picked it up and grinned.
Don't worry. They won't be for much longer.
Lissa held her breath as Merak opened the door. Inside the barn were 3 horses. They were tied to a rail and looked very nervous. Merak ventured in alone to investigate. He prodded at the bales of hay with his sword to see if anything was hiding amongst them, but there was nothing there.
It's all right, everyone.
Suddenly, a loud bang and a flash of green light caused Merak to fall over. When he looked up, he saw the horses panicking, so he rolled out of the way of their stamping hooves. He let out a cry as he felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his backside. Then he heard a strange, squeaky voice.
What do you want here?
Who's there?
The pain came again.
I'm the one holding the safe end of the stick, while you're the one sat on the other end.
Merak turned his head and peered over his shoulder into the shadowy corner behind him.
Since you have me at your mercy, why don't you come into the light?
A short, wrinkled, fat-nosed man emerged, holding his stick with as much determination as before.
There. Had a good look.
Is it a troll, Kylan?
What sort of question is that?
Definitely not.
The little man was deeply offended.
Do I look like a troll?
Well, I've never seen one before.
Trolls are covered in black hair and have fangs, you fool. And what's with this it, eh? If you'd said, is he a troll, I might find it in myself to forgive you.
With that, the angry dwarf threw a tiny sackcloth bag at the ground, creating another green explosion.
So, you're a magician, then?
Kylan was fully aware that the man was not.
Oh, yes. The most powerful magician in the whole world.
Really? Prove it.
I already have.
With flashes of green light? Well, I fear for my life.
There's no need to be sarcastic. This stuff was good enough to scare the trolls away.
Let me guess. A mixture of the powder gained by grinding up various rocks, yes?
Bang dust, I call it.
The dwarf was proud.
My very own invention.
It's been around for centuries.
So have I.
How many?
Well, about 1. Almost.
That's nothing, my friend.
And you'd know, would you?
Indeed.
Kylan waved a finger, turning the dwarf's stick into a hissing snake, which he dropped immediately. Merak got to his feet, rubbing his sore backside.
Thank you, Kylan.
The dwarf was stunned.
Kylan?
That's right. Kylan. The most powerful magician in the whole world. Merak, Lissa, help Goldstone take charge of the horses.
But these are my horses now. I was going to sell them.
Kylan bent down to talk to the dwarf.
What is your name, little one?
Gynog, the 3rd.
Well, Gynog, the 3rd. Unless my friends and I make use of these horses, there really will be no one to sell them to. I mean, you wouldn't want the world to fall into the hands of your ex-king, Draig, would you?
Isn't he dead?
Not anymore.
In that case, no, I wouldn't.
Then the matter is settled.
The travellers sat astride their horses in the village square. Goldstone had one to himself, while Merak and Lissa sat together, and Kylan shared his with Gynog. Lissa pointed at the dwarf.
Why is he coming with us?
Goldstone threw back his head and laughed.
You must be popular with manners like that.
Kylan smiled along.
Gynog tells me that he is a thief, and for what we are going to attempt, We need as many talents as we can gather.
Goldstone saw the wisdom in Kylan's statement.
That's right. You never know when a man with such talents will come in handy.
Now, my friends, we travel to the village of Depalon to protect the final crystal. With the strength of these horses and the power of my magic, we can get there far in advance of General Tychon.
He uttered a magic spell, and the horses began to glow with a fiery red light.
Hold on, everybody.
The horses started running, gathering speed, until they became a brilliant crimson blur. Deep within the dark fortress, Dry gloated over the stolen crystals. Before him stood a stone statue of himself, into which he placed the gemstones. One was placed in each eye socket, and one in the palm of each hand. Another 8 formed a star shape that spread across the statue's chest.
Soon for number 13.
He stared at the place reserved for the final crystal, the center of the statue's forehead. Although he had every reason to be happy, Dreig suddenly felt very uneasy. He was about to realize his dreams. Once more the world would be his. Nevertheless, he did feel concerned.
I should consult Vira. Maybe she can explain his sensation.
Chapter 6. The Quest for the 13th Crystal. Dreig sat in a black, high-backed chair.
So what does it mean, Vira?
As everything is going according to plan, your feeling of unease can mean only one thing: that there exists a very real cause for concern. I have consulted the mystic flames, and they have told me the problem. An old foe has become involved.
Who?
The one who killed you. Will Goldstone.
Impossible.
The flames do not lie.
How can he know that I live again?
He is not certain that you do, but he knows of your plans and is preparing to interfere.
Dreig thought on this for a while.
Well, as I am familiar with my enemy, I can devise a way to defeat him.
There is something else, Dreig. Goldstone is being helped.
By whom?
That I cannot tell you. We have not met this man before. But I do know that he will prove a formidable opponent, as he possesses great strength, magical power, and wisdom.
As nothing more could be said on the matter, Dreig decided to change the subject.
How long will it be before Tychon reaches Depalon?
He will be there by tomorrow evening.
Then Goldstone will have to move quickly if he intends to stop us. We have a considerable head start.
The horses' gallop slowed to a steady walking pace as the group entered the Depalon forest. General Tychon was very excited.
Not long now. Once this next crystal has been taken, I will have achieved my goal, and then the rest is up to Dreig.
Thinking about how different the world would be under his master's rule made him happy indeed. When the trees became fewer and the village was in sight, Tychon grinned and shouted,
This is it, men. Have your weapons ready.
The army charged upon the village, but came to a halt when they realized that the villagers were nowhere to be seen.
They must have heard about our other raids and fled in panic.
Whether that was the case was unimportant, as Tychon was now face to face with the statue of Dazan. He got off his horse and approached the statue. As he went to remove the crystal from its forehead, Goldstone stepped out from behind Dazan and grabbed the general's outstretched hand.
I never realized you were so interested in jewelry, General. Let me guess. It's your mother's birthday.
Tychon was shocked.
Goldstone, I never expected to see you again. Well, that's life. You have to expect the unexpected. You mean like this?
Tychon's sword came out of nowhere, as did Goldstone's, and a fierce fight began. Tychon's men also found themselves having to do battle, as the villagers had suddenly appeared and were attacking with their tools. Kylan, Gynog, Merak and Lissa stood watching the fight. Merak held up the sword he had found in Antlathan.
It's time I learned how to use this weapon.
Lissa grabbed a sword from a fallen warrior.
I think I'll join you, brother.
The pair rushed headlong into the crowd, battling the enemy with fierce strokes. Kylan turned to Gynog.
Gynog, you take care of the crystal.
With pleasure, oh extremely magical one.
In the meantime, I'll give Tychon's men something else to think about.
Gynog waddled through the mayhem and climbed up the statue. Sitting on Dazan's shoulders, he reached round to the face and tried removing the crystal. He yelled and removed his hand when the statue's head was struck by Goldstone's sword. Goldstone kicked Tychon's left leg out from underneath him, and the general fell to the ground with a yell. His sword held high. Goldstone moved in for the kill, but Tychon raised his foot, and with a hefty kick aimed at Goldstone's stomach, sent his opponent flying backward. Tychon then got to his feet, removed the crystal, and put it in his pocket. He stood looking for his horse, unaware that a tiny hand was now taking what he had just stolen. Meanwhile, Kylan had used his magic to create a very threatening illusion. The invaders were shocked to see a rival army, greater in number and covered in shining armor, riding out of the forest and into the village square. Fearing for their lives, Tychon's men leapt back onto their horses and began leaving the village. Tychon, however, had seen enough to realize that Kylan was responsible for the state of panic. Believing that the crystal was still in his pocket, he was preparing to ride off, when his attention was suddenly caught by Lissa, who continued to do battle with a warrior who hadn't yet managed to flee. He advanced slowly upon her. With the battle now over and victory theirs, the villagers cheered and laughed heartily. Gynog grinned at Kylan and passed him the crystal.
I don't suppose I could have that when you're finished with it, could I?
Absolutely not.
Goldstone approached the pair, rubbing his bleeding forehead.
I hit my head on a rock. I was out cold for a few minutes.
Hey everyone, come and look at this.
Goldstone, Kylan and Gynog went to see what Merak had found. Lying on the ground was one of Tychon's warriors, still alive and moaning.
If you think your head hurts now, just wait till you've spent some time with me.
Goldstone removed the warrior's helmet. The four were surprised when they saw the face underneath.
A woman! I'd never have guessed.
Thanks a lot.
I don't mean that you don't look like one. It is just that you're very muscular.
And you're very short.
She comes with us. She might be able to help us find a way into the Dark Fortress.
If you think I'll help...
Goldstone touched her neck with his sword.
I know you'll help.
Kylan clapped his hands together and announced,
So, the village is safe, and we have the crystal. I think we'd better be on our way.
Just a minute. Where's Lissa?
The travellers, with the help of the villagers, began searching everywhere for Lissa, but they had no luck. They soon realized that Tychon had taken her. Chapter 7. Lissa is taken to Dreig. Lissa sat behind Tychon on his horse, her hands tied together.
Where are you taking me?
You'll find out soon enough.
The pair were surrounded by the rest of Tychon's army, only 20 horses galloping in the direction of the dark fortress. One of Tychon's men suddenly yelled,
General! Behind us!
Tychon looked over his shoulder and was astonished to see Goldstone and his friends approaching at an unbelievable speed, their horses glowing like the sun.
Break up, men. With any luck, they won't know who to chase.
The riders scattered in all directions, but because Goldstone was now close enough to tell which horse carried Lissa, the travellers maintained their course. Unsure of what he could do to avoid capture, Tychon yelled,
Fire!
In the dark fortress, Vyra became aware that the general needed her help. She made her way to her meditation chamber and stared into the mystic flames. Amidst the blaze, she saw an image of Tychon, with Goldstone's group now very close behind. She placed 2 fingers upon her forehead, closed her eyes, and began to utter a spell. Goldstone drew his sword. His horse was now alongside Tychon's, as was Merac's. The pair had him between them. Merac reached out to grab his sister, while Goldstone held his sword high in the air, confident that he could remove Tychon's head with a single blow.
I'm going to see to it that you're buried in 2 coffins, General.
However, before any good could be achieved, Tychon and Lissa vanished in a flash of bright light, leaving only a very confused horse.
That's a neat trick. I wonder how he did that.
I can assure you that Tychon had nothing to do with it.
Then who?
Vyra, of course.
As Kylan had been sharing his horse with the captured warrior and Gynog, he picked up the dwarf by the scruff of his neck and placed him on Tychon's horse.
There. It was getting a bit crowded here.
So are we still heading for the Dark Fortress?
Absolutely. That's where your sister is now.
Tychon and his prisoner appeared at the center of Dreig's throne room.
Who is our guest, General?
She seemed to be with Goldstone. I thought keeping her here might prove useful, in case he was planning something.
Goldstone's plans no longer matter, nor does the identity of his friend, the magic user. Now that we have the final crystal, nothing matters.
Tychon put his hand into the pocket where he had put the crystal, and his face suddenly froze in horror. Dreig noticed his expression and demanded to know what was wrong. Tychon was speechless.
You do have the crystal, don't you?
Well, I did.
Tychon couldn't imagine how he had lost it.
You fool, Tychon! I'll guarantee that it rests in Goldstone's hands. Now I'll have to deal with him after all.
And the magic user. But first I shall deal with this girl.
Vyra took Lissa by the arm and led her out of the throne room. Thanks to Kylan's speed spell, the travellers were already at the Dark Fortress. Goldstone looked at the massive structure.
There doesn't seem to be a way in. It looks as if it's been completely sealed.
Oh, there's a way in. And our new friend is just the person to tell us about it.
Goldstone turned to the woman, whose name was Tilak, and asked how to get the doors open.
Can't that old man come up with some kind of magic spell?
When we're inside, yes. but not out here because the fortress is protected by a powerful magic shield. So it's back to brute strength and cunning. So I ask you again, how do we open the doors?
Figure it out for yourself.
Merak sighed.
I'm going to have a look at the other sides of the fortress.
He picked up his sword and walked off.
Good luck with her, Goldstone.
Goldstone was about to question Tilak again, when it occurred to him that she looked familiar.
You know, I'm sure I've met you before somewhere.
Yes, you have indeed, King Goldstone. One night many years ago in the forest of Galabis.
Of course. You're the one who was tied to that tree.
And you're the idiot who tried to rescue me.
Well, when I see a beautiful young woman tied up and being burnt by two thugs, I feel that that's what I'm supposed to do.
9 times out of 10.
So, you made it into Draig's army after all, eh?
No thanks to you. And you really are the one who finally killed Draig?
Goldstone nodded.
You know, I still have a bump on my head where you hit me with that branch.
Consider it a souvenir.
Anyway, now that we've got to know each other a little better, perhaps you'd be so kind as to let me know how to get into the fortress.
Well, you certainly won't be able to charm your way in, handsome as you are.
Now look, if your master has his way, our world will be plunged back into an era of total darkness. No one will be free to have a thought that isn't Draig's. Doesn't that bother you?
Not really.
Goldstone shook his head.
I don't understand. I'll never be able to figure out how anyone would willingly work for a monster like Draig.
He pays well.
I suppose he must.
Merak returned from examining the fortress.
Well, I've walked all round and I can't see a single hole or gap anywhere.
Gainog had an idea as his eyes scanned the fortress.
There are none on our level, but there may be something further up.
But it's too dangerous to try climbing. The walls are very smooth and the fortress is so tall.
I'll give it a go. I enjoy a good climb. Besides, as I'm so small, I'm more likely to fit through any holes that might be up there.
Good luck, Gainog.
Gainog grinned.
Luck has nothing to do with it.
With that, he removed his boots, gripped the stone wall with his toes and fingers, and began to climb. Kylan, Merak, Goldstone and Tilak watched Gainog climb the dark fortress.
How can anyone climb so high?
Merak was very anxious.
I feel dizzy just watching from down here.
After a while, they could no longer see the ascending dwarf. Kylan turned to the group.
He's inside. Now we must wait.
Chapter 8. Inside the Dark Fortress. Lissa was seated in Vyra's meditation chamber. Vyra had used a strange, sweet-smelling incense to put the girl into a trance, and was asking her about her friends as Draig watched.
Tell us about them, child. Who are they? What are their skills?
Lissa's speech was slow and slurred.
My brother Merak, brave and pure of heart. He recently began learning the ways of a warrior and continues to grow in strength.
A mere flea. He's nothing to fear.
Quiet, Draig. Go on, Lissa. What of the others?
A dwarf, Gainog, a most cunning thief. The warrior King Goldstone.
Oh, King, is it? Forget about him, my dear. I know enough about King Goldstone. Tell us about the magic user.
The wizard is very powerful. He is capable of anything.
His name! Tell us his name!
His name is Kylan.
Vyra and Draig looked at each other in shock.
It can't be true. Kylan is no more than a myth. He lives only in bedtime stories.
There are many who would think your rebirth to be just as unlikely.
There was a long silence. Then Dryg shrugged his shoulders.
Very well. It doesn't matter whether he's Kylan. After what Tychon told us about the attack on Depelon, and considering my premonition, we know that this wizard represents a very real threat.
Vyra suddenly caught sight of an image in the mystic flames. It was of Gynog, making his way down a nearby corridor.
The one called Gynog is within the Dark Fortress.
He obviously plans to open the doors. Good.
Good?
Of course. Our enemies hold the Depelon crystal. It is time to greet these heroes. Bring the girl, Vyra.
Having scuttled along many corridors and down many more flights of steps, Gynog found himself in the throne room. He checked to see that no one was around, then made his way across the room to the entrance hall beyond. In a dark, dusty corner, he found a large wooden wheel bearing a crank handle, which he began to turn. The huge doors started to open. Goldstone prodded Tilak and nodded towards the opening doors.
Move it.
I'll stay out here if it's all the same to you.
Not a chance. I want you up front where I can see you.
Sincere admiration?
Goldstone gave a little smile.
Sincere distrust.
The travellers entered cautiously, all remembering that it was called the Dark Fortress for a very good reason. It was an icy, cold place, filled with a smell that suggested wall-to-wall death. Goldstone spotted Gynog at the entrance.
Nice to see you again, Gynog. Did you run into any trouble?
No, the place seems deserted. I guess I must have scared everyone away.
Goldstone laughed at the dwarf's joke. Then he took Tilak by the arm and led the way into the throne room. Lissa, bound and still hypnotized, sat before Dryg, while Vyra and Tychon stood either side of his throne. Dryg sat rubbing his hands together in anticipation. He was delighted when the travellers entered.
Ah, Goldstone. Do come in. Make yourself at home.
No one but filth like you could feel at home here. That is, if it really is you behind that mask.
I would have thought that was obvious. True power is my signature.
Merak noticed that something was wrong with Lissa.
What have you done to my sister?
She's in a trance, young man, that is all. It will wear off soon enough.
Goldstone's voice became threatening.
Hand over the girl, Dryg.
I shall be glad to. Once I have my crystal.
You'll get no crystal from us. I know what you have planned, and I'm here to see that you don't succeed.
The mighty Kylan, I presume.
In the flesh.
Well, Kylan, old boy, I'm afraid I'm not the least bit impressed. You'll soon see that your powers mean little here.
What do you mean?
I want the crystal. You want the girl and the crystal. If I threaten the girl's life, you'll simply threaten the crystal's destruction. Neither party is able to act. So I think it's time to alter the balance. Vyra?
Yes, Dryg.
See that General Tychon changes into something a little less comfortable.
With pleasure, Dryg.
With that, Vyra turned towards Tychon, who had suddenly become rather worried. She raised her hands, spread her fingers, and a brightly coloured stream of magic flooded into the general's body. He let out a terrible scream and twisted in agony. his entire body started to change shape. Chapter 9. The Dragon and the Lost Crystal. Tychon's armor split apart and fell to the floor with a crash, revealing a body that was growing bigger by the second. Pink skin became green scales, and huge fangs extended from blackened gums. What now stood in Tychon's place was an enormous fire-breathing dragon, towering above the travellers and bellowing like thunder.
Don't worry, my friends. Getting rid of that is child's play.
Kylan raised his stick and pointed it at the terrible lizard. But as a stream of his magic lashed out, Vyra deflected it with one of her own. With a painful flash of conflicting magic, Kylan was hurled backwards against a wall and was knocked unconscious. The dragon's roar brought Lissa out of her trance. She screamed like never before when she saw its gigantic tongue wrapping round her brother. Merak slashed repeatedly with his sword until the dragon's tongue was finally hacked in two, turning the floor into a lake of bubbling green blood. The dragon responded with its flaming breath, but Goldstone leapt into action, protecting Merak and himself with his magic shield. Then he noticed that Tilak had been caught between two of the creature's claws. It picked her up, pinching so hard that it almost killed her. Goldstone ran halfway up a nearby flight of steps and jumped onto the claw that held Tilak, cutting it with his sword and freeing her. She fell to the floor. Goldstone ran to her to see that she was still alive. Meanwhile, Gynog kept trying to blind the creature with his bang dust, and Lissa, who had managed to break free of Draig's grip, attended to Kylan. She slapped him across the face many times before he woke up.
Lissa, find a way to distract that witch so that she can't interfere with what I'm about to do.
Lissa began hurling whatever she could find at Vyra, making the witch so angry that she failed to notice Kylan getting to his feet. He reached beneath his robe and produced the Depelon crystal. Rubbing the crystal between his two palms, he began muttering a magic spell, which caused the crystal to glow. When he was satisfied that the magic stone glowed brightly enough, he threw it at the dragon's chest. It sailed through the air and right through the dragon. The dragon vanished instantly, but there was no time to breathe a sigh of relief, as the crystal had flown to the far end of the throne room and had landed directly in the palm of Draig's eager hand.
Thank you very much. Now it can begin.
The travellers were led down a winding staircase that seemed to go on forever. When it finally came to an end, they found themselves in a damp, dark, rat-infested chamber. It was home to Draig's statue, which itself housed the crystals of Dazan.
Lucky 13.
Draig chuckled to himself as he placed the Depelon crystal in the statue's forehead.
So now that you have them all, Draig, what do you want them for?
Power, my narrow-minded foe. When the crystals of Dazan are brought together, the one who holds them gains tremendous power. Now I shall be able to control every mind in the world. I shall be a sorcerer, even greater than both Kylan and Vyra put together.
Not yet, you won't. You still don't have the lost crystal.
No, but I shall. I shall. And you were wrong, Vyra. Wrong about there being no power without the lost crystal. Already I can feel their energy flowing into me. And tomorrow the world changes for the worse.
You're a very impatient man, aren't you, Draig? Most sorcerers spend years learning their art. But you have to have the magic instantly. And you simply can't wait until you have all the crystals. You have to start absorbing their energy now, when the full extent of that energy is not yet available to you.
One more crystal won't make much of a difference. The number 13 is what makes it begin. One more crystal can wait.
But it's such a shame, though, for you. You see, when all 14 are brought together, the power you're feeling now is multiplied by 14. It's a pity you have to rush these things.
Just then, Dryg noticed that Kylan was holding something in his hand.
What's that?
This? Oh, just a crystal. The lost crystal of Dazan.
You have it? Where did you find it?
I've always had it. It was given to me at birth by Dazan himself. I am its guardian.
Goldstone remembered that he had seen this crystal a long time ago.
Of course. It belongs to the statue in your cave.
That's right, Will. But times change, and now it belongs to Dryg.
Dryg and Vyra were as amazed as Kylan's companions.
What?
Well, the crystals make such a pretty set. If someone's collecting them, he really should have them all.
Kylan, no!
He'll be unbeatable!
Kylan tossed the crystal to Dryg. Quivering with excited disbelief, Dryg placed the crystal on top of the statue and began to laugh uncontrollably.
That's right, listen, my dear. I'll be unbeatable.
The chamber began filling with a deep red light, as if the fortress was sinking into hell itself. Magical energy crackled from crystal to crystal, and everything began vibrating.
It has started. My new power. My new reign. I can rule the world or destroy it. I am everything now.
Everyone stood in silence as they watched Dryg glowing with magic and madness.
And my first act as Dryg the Sorcerer will be a simple act of revenge. Revenge against Goldstone the King. I shall avenge my own death by killing the man who did this to me!
Chapter 10. The Sun Crystal of Dazan. Merak, Lissa, Gynog and Tilak gasped when Dryg removed his mask, for the face they now saw was little more than the face of death.
Why should you take revenge for your ugliness? Goldstone didn't do that to you. You did it yourself.
What do you mean?
Dryg, people aren't supposed to live forever.
How can you say that? You're even older than I am.
I know, but you see, I had no choice. I have lived so long because the sun god, Dazan, wanted it so. He wanted me to live on and train Goldstone so that he could destroy you. I've lived this long for a reason, as I'm sure is the case with Vyra. Scarif has plans for her.
Vyra smiled at Kylan, but said nothing.
But you, Dryg, you asked for eternal life. Vyra's medallion prevented you from aging. When Will removed it, time caught up with you. Time took its revenge against you.
Well, in this life, time will not punish me, because there is no medallion to remove. Vyra brought me back with one of her black crystals, like the one from the medallion. But this crystal does not hang from my neck. It is inside me. She shattered it and mixed its fragments with the dust of my last body. So the crystal now exists in my every bone, my every fiber.
Vyra's crystals are very powerful.
Dryg nodded.
They're almost as powerful as these.
He ran a gloved finger over the crystals of Dazan.
Although nothing holds as much power as the Sun Crystal.
The Sun Crystal? What is that?
What do you remember of your death?
Dryg was silent for a while as he tried to recall his final moments.
I remember a blinding light.
A light which made it possible for Goldstone to kill you. Well, I will tell you about the light. It began with the light of the crescent moon. The moonlight passed through the sun crystal. It is unique, a golden stone, and it resides at the center of Will's shield.
Bright light. Is that the extent of its power?
Oh no, Draig. The sun crystal has many secrets, and each time you are born, the crystal will be waiting to destroy you.
Unless I already own it.
Draig drew his sword, and Goldstone drew his. As the two men fought, Draig received many wounds, but they healed instantly. Eventually, Draig managed to grab the shield of Dazan. He took it from Goldstone, who he knocked to the floor.
I'm sorry, Kylan, but he's too strong this time.
And I shall get even stronger.
Draig stood beside the crystals of Dazan, staring lovingly at the shield and the sun crystal.
I now own every crystal that Dazan ever made.
And that is why you are about to die. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist such a prize. That's why I told you about the sun crystal. You fell into the trap beautifully.
What trap?
You cannot be the owner of the 14 crystals of Dazan and the sun crystal, because no one can. They cannot exist side by side. Only the greediest man alive would attempt such a thing. And if there's one thing the crystals don't appreciate, it's greed. They will destroy you.
Ha! I already have them, and nothing has happened.
That is because one of the crystals is incomplete.
With that, Kylan revealed the tiny crystal fragment from Goldstone's miniature statue of Dazan. He placed it in the palm of his hand, breathed in, and blew upon the sparkling sliver. It flew from his hand, through the air, and fixed itself back onto the crystal from which it had been taken. A low rumbling was heard, becoming louder and louder, and the walls and floor began to crack.
What's happening?
It's over, Draig. You've lost.
The ground beneath Draig's feet split apart, and Draig fell into an ever-widening chasm. His head and shoulders still in sight, he held onto the crumbling floor, giving Goldstone enough time to retrieve his precious shield. Draig looked to Vyra with fear in his eyes.
Vyra! Help me!
I think I've helped you enough, Draig. I can't be expected to solve all your problems.
Vyra uttered a spell and vanished. The ground which Draig was holding onto began to crack, and in an instant he fell screaming into the eternal abyss below. Kylan was quick to act.
Everyone, we have to rescue the crystals. We'll all take some because they must be kept apart.
The travelers divided the crystals amongst themselves and began leaving the disintegrating dark fortress. Back in their home village of Gavarus, Merak and Lissa placed the crystal back where it belonged and told the villagers that life would soon be returning to the land. Then they joined their travelling companions, who were enjoying a round of ale in the village tavern.
Kylan? King Goldstone?
Will do.
We cannot thank you enough. Thanks to you, our village can live again.
Not just our village, every village in the land of Delania.
Kylan and myself are not the only heroes here. Everyone played a part.
Kylan stood up, holding a bag of crystals.
I must leave now. These crystals must be returned to Dazan as soon as possible.
Then Gynog too stood up.
I think I'll join you. There's much I can learn from you, Kylan.
Do you intend to use my knowledge to make you a better thief?
I promise. From now on, I'll become a true magician and use my powers to do good.
Very well. Will, before I go, I better return that crystal fragment.
No, Kylan. Leave it where it belongs. I won't be needing it anymore.
So, have you had enough of living in the wilderness?
That's right. I've decided to rejoin civilization.
Tilak slipped her arm through Goldstone's.
We've decided.
Are you saying that you've learnt the error of your ways, young lady?
Absolutely. I realized the value of life when I so nearly lost my own. And as I really do appreciate Will rescuing me this time, I plan to share my life with him.
Kylan looked at Goldstone and shrugged his shoulders.
Oh well, perhaps Tilak isn't that bad after all.
Hey, that's not fair.
Don't worry, Kylan. Tilak will make a fine wife for me.
Kylan and Gynog said their goodbyes, then walked off towards the setting sun. Goldstone looked at his wife-to-be, holding both her hands.
So the dark fortress has been swallowed by the ground, and Draig is dead once again.
All in a day's work.
Tilak looked cheerful and very much in love. Merak interrupted the tender moment.
Do you think he'll ever trouble us again?
Him? No, he's had enough chances. He's gone for good.
What about that witch woman?
Which woman?
Vyra.
Oh, yes. Vyra. Well, I have the feeling we'll know a lot more about her one day. She'll let us know.
It was with a great deal of satisfaction that William wrote the words, "The End," at the bottom of the page. The second book in the Golden Stone Saga was now reality. He put the finished manuscript away in a safe place and left the house to enjoy a walk amidst the warming rays of the golden sun.
Επιμέλεια Γιώργος Πιτροπογιαννάκης.